Hi, my name's leowt, and you have found your way to the Conversations podcast. Conversations exist to create spiritually minded conversations about life. We desire to create safe space for dialogue and community. We desire to come together regularly and intentionally to generate conversations about life, belief, and the intersection of the two. Everyone is welcome at the conversation.
But welcome, friends. This is Conversations, and I am leowt. If you're new here, hi, hello, how are you? Does anyone watch Bailey Sarian? Because I definitely just stole her verbiage. But if you're new here, my name's Leo, and this is Conversations. We gather together regularly and intentionally to have spiritually minded conversations about life, belief, and the intersection of the two. And the only non-negotiable of conversations is that absolutely everybody is welcome at the conversation. So this is actually, my dear friend here has the distinction of being the first real human I've talked to on Conversations.
Oh, well, hello.
And I'm not talking to a Zoom-based hologram. I could actually reach out and touch said person if I want to, but I'm not going to be creepy. So, but I am here tonight because my friend Brian, I've been angling to get this guy on the podcast for a minute, and he was like, I don't know. And I was like, bro, you got to do it. And then he just so happened to move back into town, and I've been badgering him ever since. So, true story. I can tend to be persuasive when I want to be. So, but tonight we have an interesting topic. If you saw the title, I really want to talk about something that's been heavy on my mind lately with everything that's been going on in my local community. If you're not from Olean, New York, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of what's happening. Essentially, 2 weeks ago, a local evangelical pastor who also happens to be the middle school principal actively preached and broadcast publicly on social media that LGBTQ people, Democrats, Muslims, people with mental health issues, and people who are pro-choice are all of the devil. Furthermore, he and his wife preached that they were going to infiltrate the school systems. And they also preached they were actively praying that the lips of the enemy would be stitched shut and the tongues would be cut out. I think cut out was the word, if I remember correctly. Something like that, right? It was mildly terrifying and aggressive language. So, at any rate, here we are. But that happened 2 weeks ago. And then in response, there's been a couple of protests. There was a protest outside of the church of said pastor, which Brian actually attended and helped me sort of co-officiate. It was a good time. It was a good time. And then there was a school board meeting where another local pastor who is not a community stakeholder in Olean, has no children in the school district, and doesn't pay taxes in the school district, came to the school board meeting and went up to speak and actually physically pulled a copy of the Constitution out of the Bible, which seems to be the whole problem in the first place, and then proceeded to grandstand about religious freedom, dubbing himself the White Knight of religious freedom. And henceforth, everybody else is just not on brand. Doesn't matter if you're a pastor that actually has any real training or not. You're wrong, basically. And then the same pastor with a group of people actively screamed over me while I was trying to deliver the end of my speech, which was in fact not about religion, just about actual social media policies and school board manual updates that should happen. So there's been a lot that's been going on lately in our town, but one of the most disturbing things that I've found, Brian and I have kind of discussed this ad nauseum, that's why I keep looking at him, other than his dashing good looks. We've discussed this ad nauseum, is that there is an expressed air of support for both the pastor that preached the incredibly theologically incorrect message and the pastor that got up and was grandstanding about religious freedom in a conversation that was actually about school district policy. And then said same pastor actually actively incited people to yell epithets at people as they were coming out of the school, and actively actively dead named me in a way to demean me in public. And that's really disturbing to me as a person who is actually a Christian pastor and who has training, years and years of training and multiple jobs and career situations under my belt in that realm. And Brian and I are kind of in a certain accord of this. So we wanted to kind of talk about that. And one thing I know about Brian is that his main thing is peace and love, and actively creating those things. So this is why I brought Brian on. I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit. Now that you have the background, this is kind of what's up. We're going to see from Brian who he is, what his passions are, why the hell he decided to come on and be interviewed by me, and then we're going to kind of dive into the conversation. So I'm glad you're here. This issue is far-reaching, and it's frankly a cancer that's spreading through American Christendom. And we're going to talk about it, and we're going to go there, and we're going to parallel it with the situation that's happening in Olean, New York. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Brian, so introduce himself.
Excellent. Leo, very thankful to be here.
Absolutely.
Leo and I go back a long way. In my past life, I was a journalist, and that is how I first met Leo.
Yep.
Working at the local newspaper. About 7 years ago, actually be more like 10 years ago, I started feeling a call to ministry, started pursuing that, and began the ordination process in the United Methodist Church. The last 7 years, I've led churches in Western New York as well as Central New York in the United Methodist Church. I was recently ordained as a United Methodist deacon, so I'm ordained clergy. And as Leo alluded to, I am all into peace and justice. I feel a big call, a strong sense that my call to ministry centers around peace and justice. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the United Methodist Church, because all denominations have their different quirks and stuff, a deacon in particular is a pastor that focuses on the ministries of compassion and justice. I at one point thought about being an elder, which is more of like the ordering the life of the church, the person you would typically see as the lead pastor. And I decided that compassion and justice are just way more compelling for me. So,
absolutely.
and now I just recently moved back to Olean.
Yeah.
And
here we are. Brian's words were, and I quote,
Okay.
I'm really excited to F shit up with you. And I was like, we're going to get into all of the good trouble, and you've been home for 25 seconds, and here we are having this conversation. So obviously, there was fertile ground for this.
I've already protested 2 churches.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy.
It's a thing we have already done. That's happening, so. I am absolutely dead. So, in case you guys are wondering what's up, I have my phone here to monitor our conversation. I don't actually have my computer in front of me, which I usually do, so I apologize if this seems awkward at all, but Donnie, I had to represent the Bills Mafia, 40-something to nothing. That was a good day on the football field. I do apologize to people who don't actually like football. One thing I've realized as a pastor in my actual literal studies and coursework of becoming a pastor is that things that build community are kind of the purpose of what the church is supposed to do. Building community instead of tearing it down. And so if we need to build community around football, go Bills. But so, Brian, what I really love about you is you're like a straight white male, but like not a shitty one.
I appreciate that, and hopefully I live up to that on most days.
Absolutely. So I love that you are deeply committed to utilizing your privilege for the benefit of others. And I think that's really important because I think a lot of what we see in modern day evangelicalism, as represented in Olean, New York, is this sort of hetero cis white patriarchy that literally has just taken over the church. And frankly, the ideas of those ideologies don't actually fit with the message of Jesus. And I don't believe that you can actively preach them and still love people that are harmed by that doctrine. Right. What would you say about that idea? Because I know that your heart is focused around the tangible work of actually loving people and actually working towards peace. So talk to me a little bit about what inspired you about that, when you realized that your focus had turned to that, and kind of what that means for you in your life.
Sure. Well, yeah. So I guess I noticed when I was leading churches that like administrative stuff sucks.
Mhm.
Does not light me up.
Does
The-
not bring joy in Marie Kondo's words.
Yes, the thing that lights me up is when I could go to a Black Lives Matter rally. You know, clearly, like I'm in my collar, like people know that I represent the church.
Mhm.
One of the things that I hear most often in those spaces is, "Where's the church?
Mhm.
Where are the pastors? Where is anybody representing a religion, but Christianity in particular?"
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I like to show up in those spaces and say, like, I don't know, I might be a minority here, but
Mhm.
at the same time, I do believe, as somebody who tries to follow Jesus, that this is where Jesus is leading me.
Mhm.
You know, Jesus was ministering to those on the margins. And so I assume that, you know, about 2,000 years later, as somebody who tries to follow Jesus, I should follow suit.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. And I think that's so important because, like, you know, there has been an incredible amount of pushback against me personally once I decided to essentially come
Yeah.
out as a Christian, right?
Yes.
And this is the irony in my life is that this is the fourth time I've come out. The first 3 times were as queer, and now I'm like, bro, I'm a Christian, and this is the one that got people in an uproar, you know?
Yeah.
Because how dare I stake a claim to Christianity? But, I mean, if you look at, like, take away even all the miracles of Jesus for a moment. If you
Sure.
look at historical Jesus, what did Jesus do? Actually went to the people
Mm-hmm.
and provided them with their needs.
Yeah.
You know, and so if you're claiming to be a Christian, yet you're actively preaching against the margins, and you're
Mhm.
saying margins come to us, I don't think that's modeled in the Bible.
Not at all.
No, I mean,
The
not literally.
opposite.
The opposite, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And I just think that this is both a sacred and secular conversation
Mm-hmm.
because we have self-titled pastors bringing the conversation into the physical realm. How do you think that this plays out for you when you want to like be a pastor but without preaching? Like, what is that? Like, what is all of the situations that have been unfolding in here? How does that like sit with you as a person?
I know that a pastor's job is not even primarily to preach. A pastor's job is to, like, you know, essentially shepherd people, be with people. And so, you know, when these things are happening and like you're like, oh, we're gonna have a stand-in for love. Okay, like
Mhm.
my job is not to preach there. My job is to show up and be supportive.
Mhm.
My job is to encourage others to come around and surround people who are being marginalized with love.
Mhm.
And not like a superficial kind of like, oh yeah, we love you, but you know, you're not perfect how you are, you know, come in and be with like us. It's more like, no, like I'm gonna surround you and affirm that you indeed are a child of God as I am.
Mm-hmm. I think that's critical because there's this attitude. I've been doing a TikTok series lately, which like TikTok is a dumpster fire, and I love and hate it on any given day.
Sure.
But I've been doing a TikTok series lately about translating Christian. And if I had $1 for every evangelical, non-denominational church that says all are welcome, but actually preaches against BLM, says that LGBTQ people are the devil, or apparently is literally going to go as far to say as Democrats are the devil. Like, how does this sit with you theologically? Because again, this is a sacred and secular conversation,
It is,
and
yeah.
if you're a pastor, you have to think about the theology, but act in the world. So tell me a little bit about what disconnects do you see in that theology? What is your study of theology taught you? Like, where does that lie for you?
Well, it seems to me like when you know, let's, you know, take some of the examples that we're talking about, like that is current and happening in our
Yeah.
town. You know, like the people that are outside of the government of God are not even people who are mentioned in the Bible.
Right.
Like, I mean,
It's a very good point.
the Democratic Party wasn't around in Jesus' day.
Yeah, nor
You know?
was Islam, really, if we're
Right.
being honest, nor was
Yeah.
Islam. So
Exactly. That didn't come until a few centuries later. So, it just theologically that just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't really hold any water for me.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I don't ascribe to any political party. So just taking that example, I look at it and I'm like, I can find faults in all sorts of things that are happening with Democrats and Republicans.
Right.
And everybody in between. But at the same time, I have to look at, what's important to me is, especially if we're going to have these conversations around, what Christians are supposed to do, and good Christians, good evangelical Christians are supposed to vote Republican.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, good Jesus following people should be voting in a way, or should be acting in a way that seeks to build equity in this world, that seeks to lift up the people on the margins, and not in a way that like we're a savior to them, or like elevated above them, but that we're all children of God.
Yeah.
And we should be working together and not creating these divisions.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most wild comments that I've gotten, and this isn't even leading to a question. This is just a statement. But I've seen so many people saying like, "Oh, you're spreading hate by coming against this pastor."
Yep.
What in the hell?
I saw those comments and I went,
What kind of gaslighting, backwards understanding of theology do you have that creating accountability for a pastor who otherwise has no accountability, mind you? Side note for everybody who's watching, when you go to a non-denominational church or an evangelical churches, quite often outside agencies.
True story.
Henceforth, they are the God in their own realm. They are the prophet, if you will, if you want to use Hebrew Bible terms. They're the prophet whom God speaks to, and everybody else is supposed to listen to them and not question. Whereas folks like Brian and myself, I practically have to have every poop I take. I practically have to have every poop I take, like approved by a governing body. Mm-hmm. And then we have people who are just popping off. You know what I mean?
Right. Like if I were to pop off in a similar way, like I'd have like some serious conversations with my bishop that could lead to some kind of consequence. There would be accountability to that.
Absolutely.
And if things went far enough, I'd lose my ordination. Like I'd lose my ability to call myself a pastor.
Which, for the record, took like thousands and thousands of dollars and years of your life.
Right.
You didn't just decide.
I didn't show up one day and said,
Just like, I think I have a couple transferable skills from my previous job.
Which is true, but that doesn't make me a pastor.
Exactly. And I just think that that's incredibly pertinent in the conversation, because if you're going to believe something, it should bear with it action.
Yeah.
So when I hear people say, I believe in peace and love, but then I either don't see actions, or I see specific and calculated inactions or support of toxic theology, what does that leave me to believe about another person's, like, how does that sit with you when another pastor says, I'm all about love, but then actively supports what's been happening in Olean?
Right. There's a decent amount of verses in Scripture that would point to love as a verb or love as action. What does that lead you to do?
Right. Like, what's the tangible side effect?
And like one of the things that I hear often, and I like, if I go to a protest situation, often you'll hear the phrase "no justice, no peace," which I think is a very a religious statement. I think it's, and maybe it's not intentionally that way, but it's true that peace only happens alongside justice. So it's not enough to talk about it. I have this quote here from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "It's not enough to talk about love. There's another side called justice, and justice is love in action. Justice is love working against anything that stands against love. Standing beside love is always justice."
I think that's so pertinent and salient in this moment, because the whole reason that we're having conversation is because you cannot say you love someone while actively working against their best interest, or supporting or not speaking up against someone who's actively working against their best interests. That is logically incoherent.
Sure.
Right? And I mean, like, you can't, like MLK was saying, you can't have one without the other. These are two sides of the same coin.
A peace without justice is a false peace.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's just not real.
It's placating, right?
Yeah.
And this is what I think I see amongst a lot of, so we have kind of a couple of groups of pastors in our town and in the world in general.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times the mainline pastors, so your Catholics, your Presbyterians, your Episcopalians, are the people who have been with the work of justice from the beginning. They're the people who actively have a connection to the historical church.
Yes.
But we don't always hear about them.
Mm-hmm.
What we hear about is the people who are absolutely raging. They are politicians cosplaying as Christians. Someone said that, and I stole it. It's amazing.
I love it.
There's conservative evangelicalism, white evangelicalism, is actually political cosplay. But then we have another group of people who's like, oh, I just believe in love. I love everybody, and I'm not going to take a side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you're neutral in times of injustice, when you are saying you want peace but without working towards justice, you're honestly just blowing smoke.
Yeah, one of the things that I had preached at one point, because if you were to talk to anybody I've served in a pastoral role in the last 7 years, they're probably like, all right, like I've heard peace and love so many times. Like, what's your other sermon?
Right.
I'm not sure that I have one, but
Right.
one of the things, even when we were talking, going through the beginning stages of COVID-19, and there was a lot of things that kind of came out of that showed inequality and injustice in our world and in our country. But one of the things that, and I firmly believe this, to stay silent and completely ignore what is happening is not living in love. So you could say, oh, I just believe in love and all that stuff, but to completely ignore the thing that is happening is not actually love.
Yeah, no.
It's actually, what it is privilege. Like, I don't have to worry about that. And like, as you pointed out earlier, I'm a cisgendered white male.
Mm-hmm.
It would be very easy for me to say, like, I mean, homophobia, transphobia, like racism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really? That's still a problem in
Right.
2021?
Right.
But that's not me living in love.
Right.
I'm like, oh, no, I support you. That's great. But, like, I mean, don't ask me to do anything against the oppressor.
Right.
Like, I don't know if I feel comfortable that way. That's not loving.
No.
Love is an action. Love is a verb, and the love that we're talking about often when we talk about love is in what Scripture is often talking about is not necessarily like the love that I would have between me and my wife, or me and my son, or me and my really good friends.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about what the Greeks would say agape, and this is a love that's a verb.
Mm-hmm.
This is a love that's action, and this is a godly love.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to be committed to godly love, that requires me to move my feet.
Oh, absolutely. Love, like, faith without works is dead, right? Like, that's Bible, like 101. Everybody will come at you with that verse.
Yep.
But now all of a sudden we can love people without taking action. Like, how is that? That doesn't even make sense by your own logic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It doesn't at all.
Yeah.
Someone brought up the question in the feed, and I would love to honor this question for a moment.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the idea that one group of people or any of these categories of religions have got the concept that are truly superior and they're above people that are in the community? Like,
Yeah.
how can this? I'm not even going to placate you or play it off. There's a very specific type of churches that are claiming moral authority right now,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
They often overlap with white evangelical Christendom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these groups have gotten the idea that their way is the right way, and because they yell the loudest, there's this idea that they're superior. Why do you think that happened? How do you think that happened when, as we've just talked about, like the actual denominations connected to the historical church have been in the trenches doing the peace work for a long time? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where do you think that disconnect comes?
Conservative evangelicalism marrying itself to right-wing politics, that's kind of become a very dangerous
It's like the worst
thing.
marriage in
Oh my
history.
goodness, for the last couple of decades. But the question actually reminds me, several years ago when I was a journalist here, one of the churches we're talking about was under a different name with different pastors, and there were signs around the village of Allegheny that said, "We are the true church, and if you don't go here, you're not." And so, I see this, and now this is a news story.
Oh my God, that's horrifyingly embarrassing.
It is, and so I had to call in the pastor and the pastor's wife, and have a conversation of like, so what's this about? And they were like, oh, that's not us, and we didn't authorize that, and that's not what we believe, and whatever. But somehow at least somebody had it in their mind.
Yeah.
That because they went to this church and held these beliefs, they were superior to everybody else. And I've come to the conclusion, that I do not think any one denomination or one religion holds claim on ultimate truth.
100%.
We are all humans, and flawed in some ways and imperfect with our thinking. And so for me to stand up and say, like, I have all the answers, I belong to the right belief system, and everybody else is inferior to me, just doesn't make any sense.
Oh, absolutely. It's an arrogance that reeks of privilege and white supremacy.
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
I'm actually in the process of reading. A good friend of mine, who I hope is watching, Chanel, if you're around, I'm taking this nod from you, but a friend of mine is doing a research project for law school.
Okay.
Church superiority, and why in particular, I don't know how to say it other than white conservative evangelical churches, why they get the air of moral superiority. Like, why do you think that these people think that they are the truth? And you had referenced the fact that there were actual signs in Allegheny where people said their church was the true church. So let's pick back up at that point if you're good.
Yeah. So there was the signs that were going around saying that these folks at this particular church were the true church, and if you didn't belong to this church, you were not part of the church.
So just screw any other church?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
Awesome.
And so I remember doing a story on that, and I had to call out the pastors and have them come in, interview them, and they were all like, "This is not us, and we don't preach that, and this we didn't authorize those signs." And so that was fascinating.
So awful.
Yeah, and then I think before this thing died last time, you had mentioned a few different things about like the
KKK
and that sort of thing, which reminded me just a few years ago when I was out in Central New York. I was serving a couple of churches out in Rome, New York, and there was a group that came through early in the morning, dropped off like little sandwich bags with candy in them.
Okay.
Like a little fun-sized candy bar, and like with a little poster that said, join the Northern Knights of the KKK, that kind of thing.
What?
And it showed up in 3 different communities, and the timing of this is such that like it happened sometime early morning, and then like kids go out to their bus stop, the end of their driveway, and go, "Oh, look, there's candy," and like now they got this flare.
Oh my God.
So there was a lot of demonstration and things and conversation that we had around that when we were there. But one of the things that I got really interested in was going to the website of this particular organization, just because I needed to see what are the tenets of their beliefs. And it was just amazing to me how much scripture was on their website justifying their beliefs in superiority. Almost as if like, Jesus was like this nice, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, American as apple pie kind of guy.
That's horrifying.
Yeah,
and
it was.
I think that is horrifyingly emblematic of the problem that we see in American Christianity.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, first of all, I am a Christian pastor. I am born and raised as a Christian. I have worked as a Christian pastor in the Evangelical Christian Missionary Alliance and Pentecostal, like Assemblies of God's environments. Been paid to work in these environments. I understand American Christianity very, very well. And I think that when you dig below the surface, there is a horrifying connection between Christian nationalism, white supremacy, and the obvious Ku Klux Klan, as I'm now learning, and this sense of arrogance and superiority.
Well, and you think about it throughout history, even American history, like we come over and we colonize this land that we steal. And one of our objectives, if we're not trying to actively destroy indigenous culture, we are trying to by like slaughter, that sort of thing. We are then actively trying to destroy it by, you need to become like us. You need to become like white, good Christian people.
Assimilationists.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's what we did to Native American children.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and the church has a lot to repent. You know, if you want to get churchy about it.
Yeah.
And that it has a lot to repent for the American slavery. You know, holding people down, whether that's the voting rights or any like the church is. You know, you could say there's pretty good people on both sides. I've heard somebody say.
Yeah, I've heard someone say that.
But there are people on the wrong side of history with Bible in hand throwing out verses.
Yeah. And it's so disheartening because I frequently say I reluctantly identify as a Christian. And then when people ask me why reluctantly, I'm like, have you met any other Christians? Like, are you really asking me this question in seriousness? Because there is an incredibly real fallout from this type of I'm just gonna love everybody mentality. That there's no action to that love. And in some cases, like we're seeing in our town, there's an actual complicity with the incredibly toxic, niche, narrow-minded, misinterpreted theology. I'm not the only one thinking this. Half the reason I brought Brian in here was to say, yep, Leo's right. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But like, I think you, from what I've heard of your story, you've experienced this as well, right? And what's your take after these experiences you've had in seminary, working as a pastor over multiple congregations, being actively involved in working for peace and justice, seeing what you did with the KKK engagement and stuff. What's your take on what's happening now? Like, is this at all special, or is this just part and parcel?
It feels not special, and I wish I could say that it was, but it's this is something. Okay, so it's hit only in New York. It's hit so many different places around the country that none of this is really surprising. It's just very disappointing. And this idea of choosing like, well, I'm not on the side of hate. I love. I love, but I don't want to do anything.
But I also love the hater. Like, this is essentially what's being said, right?
There's that quote, and I'll probably mess it up, but essentially, to choose not to decide or to choose not to act is still to make a choice.
Absolutely.
So if you go, well, I'm hands off on this, you're still siding with the oppressor.
Absolutely.
You're allowing it to happen without putting in actual reaction to that.
Well, absolutely. And you're siding with the oppressor, and you're, as a leader of a community, like, I know that I take being in a pastoral role incredibly seriously.
It's a big responsibility.
No one's even paying me at this moment.
Right.
No one is paying me to give two shits, and here I am. But no one is paying me at this moment.
Yep.
But when you feel this sort of passion or calling or whatever you want to have it, right? This psychological disorder, no, I don't know. But when you feel this, right, it bears with it a sense of this is my vocation, whether I'm being paid or not.
Yes.
And here we are sitting in roles where we're not being paid for this. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, why are the people who are being paid for this, where are their voices in the conversation?
That was always one of my big struggles, because just for some clarification right now, I am an ordained United Methodist pastor. I am not currently serving a church in like a leading active role, but I'm going to be working behind the scenes with a church here locally. Anyway, that's all to say, like, I get disappointed about that situation here. I was disappointed about that when I was in Rome, New York. You know, the KKK stuff happened, Black Lives Matter, all of these things where I'm just like, the church should show up. The church should be a voice in this. And, you know, it felt like to encourage my colleagues to join up with me was mostly like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
And that was very disappointing to me. And not only was it disappointing to me that those leaders wouldn't show up, but the people that they were leading wouldn't be there either.
And I think that's the issue. You know, to quote, to pull out was Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
The thing is when you are a leader, when you are a paid leader, when you are an appointed leader, right? You have a responsibility because your words impact more people than just you.
Yeah.
And so here we have paid leaders, we have appointed leaders, and we have some people, in some cases here in Olean, who are supposed to be elected leaders. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't.
Sure.
But these leaders are actively not taking a stand. And some of these leaders, the reason this conversation is overlapping is that some of these leaders are both political / public and pastoral representatives. Right. And so what do you think it does to a people when a leader either practices and preaches incredibly toxic theology, or when a leader simultaneously does not publicly decry toxic theology? What do you think that means, like just in terms of what you know about being a pastor?
Well, I think, you know, pastors, you know, for better or for worse, still have some authority in people's lives. You know, that authority is given to them and earned or whatever. But you know, when you have somebody saying these sorts of things and they have a willing crowd sitting and just eating it up, that sparks a reaction that you see. You know, even some people like getting in a tizzy over all this stuff and like deciding, you know, to do the childish thing of like, you know, dead naming people.
Yeah.
Going on their Google business site and, you know, posting all kinds of negative reviews.
This is not a house of God. Excuse me, ma'am. This is a hair salon.
I mean, whatever. Yeah. So in you know, then you have part of what, you know. Well, I guess the two pastors that we could talk about, the two churches, you know, these are people who hold public positions. And so they not only have authority in their church, but they have authority within the community. School
districts and police departments.
Yeah, which gives them an added kind of layer of, I don't want to say credibility, but maybe that is the right word for a certain subset of people.
Absolutely.
You know, well, pastor said this, so I mean, it must be true.
It must be true.
It must be true.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, heaven forbid that someone is encouraged to read and study their own faith. Like if you read and study your own faith, what they might come to an opposite conclusion of me, or they might have a different understanding. So
maybe
heaven forbid, you know, heaven forbid that someone does their own research. But I would like to ask you this. I would like to ask you this question explicitly, because I'm just insanely curious what your thought is as an actual ordained person with educational and institutional backing.
Yeah.
What do you think the pastoral response should be to someone, A, preaching anti-LGBTQ, Islamophobic, you know, religiously charged messages against poor people, and also to a pastor actively, making students cry? Like, what is your pastoral response to that? Because, like, I'm not hearing a lot of pastors in Olean say anything.
Yeah.
What do you think a pastoral response is?
I think a pastoral response is A, to speak out and say, no, this is not representative of who we are as people who proclaim to follow Jesus. And two is to have direct conversation with these offending pastors to be like, this is not right. This is what you are doing is not pastoral. I mean, when you're going to a school board meeting and making young teen girls cry, that's not a pastoral move.
I don't remember that action of Jesus in the Gospels. Like, was it in one of those non-canonized ones that we're not supposed to talk about? Or?
Yeah, it was in the Gospel of Mary. Yeah.
CC my page later for all of the conversation about the Gnostic Gospel. Please, there's been an episode on that. But no, I think that's the thing, and as someone who was raised as a pastor's child, because this is another level for folks who are watching and don't know me. I know there's a lot of people who are hearing my voice who's never heard it before, so they don't understand kind of who is this Leo guy and why does he have a stake in this.
Yeah.
First of all, education. Second of all, actual professional experience. Third of all, a literal lifelong history.
Yeah.
With being involved in the family of a pastor. My dad is a pastor. My dad is still to this day an ordained pastor who happens to not agree with my standing about LGBTQ people, but does actively love me. There is an active love part to that, right? In case my dad's watching and my mom as well.
Sure.
But I've seen this come up, right? And I've seen issues happen within communities before, and I've seen how my dad responded. And my dad's first response was always active love, to be completely honest. My parents, despite our disparate ideas at this point, made me who I am.
Yeah.
And that was a person who actively loved people. Mm-hmm. They took we took people into our home, we fed people, we gave people clothes. My parents made, as a couple, less than I made at my first job. You know what I mean? Yeah. As out of college. And they still did the work on a daily basis, right? Mm-hmm. But the other thing I learned is that there's also usually local organizations of churches, right?
Yes.
Called ministeriums, which are where all the ministers in a town get together. Did they have that in Rome?
They did.
Okay, so like
it's not a very active group, but
right.
It existed.
And I think this is what bothers me is when I did a Google search the other day of churches in Olean, pretty sure I counted over 30 churches.
And there is the Greater Olean area churches.
And there is the Greater Olean area of churches, who I know does work, right? Yeah. Because I've been involved with them via my aspirancy process when I was an Episcopalian, right?
Oh,
so I've been involved with them.
Yeah.
And I know they're great people that are very supportive.
Certainly.
Of real actions towards love. But there are over 30 churches in Olean, and I'm only hearing 2 people pop off.
Yeah, that is problematic.
It is.
And not to make any excuse for that particular thing. Just an interesting side note.
Yeah.
I'm assuming this is still the case. So, excuse me if I'm incorrect. But when I was here last, when I lived in Olean 7 years ago, I know those 2 churches in particular mm-hmm. were not affiliated with GOAC mm-hmm. and adamantly not.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, this is a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
so the pastors of these 2 churches that we're talking about right now were actively not a member of the collection of local ministers. So that within itself should bear, I think, some concern, I would say, right? But the bottom line is where is the real pastoral voice here? Because it needs to be here. And literally you and I are sitting here on a Sunday night, mm-hmm. taking time from our families, interspersing this conversation between our jobs that we have to pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
Having this conversation. So where the hell is the local conversation?
Right.
Like, I mean, I understand that my podcast is called Conversations, but like other people are allowed to have them, right?
Well, and I also feel like there are and I've worked with them. There are pastors who feel like what we're talking about is a political issue.
Right. True.
You know, so like LGBTQ is a right-left issue. Mm-hmm. I don't know why, but it is.
Yeah.
And so they will either be actively, let's say, against LGBTQ, for example, mm-hmm. and not want to make a lot of noise, mm-hmm. so they'll just refrain from the conversation, or they just, I've heard so many of my colleagues, even in the UMC, I'm just not political. I just don't want to talk politics. Mm-hmm. And almost in this way of like, I don't want to piss anyone off.
Right.
Whereas your pastoral job is not to never piss anyone off. Mm-hmm. Your pastoral job is to take care of people, but part of pastoral work is also that prophetic and speaking to the time and mm-hmm. speaking to what's happening at the time.
Engaging. Oh yeah, prophets were actively engaged in the issues of their time, both sacred and secular, because to be honest, there wasn't really a ton of distinction in Bible times, right?
Yeah.
So, but prophets were the people that were up there and like, nope, not today. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where is that? Like,
Well, and it's frustrating to me. I'm gonna make a confession, and I don't know who might actually hear this, that it might bother close to home. But so the past 2 weeks, I've gone into worship, and just because a lot of things that are going on, I've kind of gotten very disenchanted with how Sunday worship often plays out, and especially since there's a lot of like joy and celebration, which there's a place for joy and celebration of God is great, God's love, and all of that. But with all of the stuff that's happening in the church or in the world, that the church as a whole is not responding to, or not, making headways on for one reason or another, or actively on the side of oppression, I got back to the prophet Amos. I'm just going to read quickly. There's a couple verses here in chapter 5 where God is saying through the prophet Amos, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your hearts. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. This is what I'm reading during the sermon the last 2 weeks, because I'm just like, I need more of this in the church.
Yeah.
I need the church to go like, who are we?
yeah.
Like, are we a group of good people who show up on Sunday and get told that Jesus loves you, then we go home and decide to like shit on people who are not like us?
Yep.
Or are we a peculiar group of people who are called to work for equity, who are called to actually be bearers of God's love in this world?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, because that's the actual thing. I wanted to point out that someone just said that they said we had a very meaningful mass on Saturday at St. Mary's after this came to light.
Oh,
The
nice.
priest did not directly reference the incidents, but rather gave us examples of when Jesus was strongly speaking out to his followers that it is not for us to judge. That is amazing, and I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that there are people who are doing that, because I also saw a clip, and I screen recorded, but I haven't got to post it yet, of the pastor from the Presbyterian church who was also saying the same. He was using the parable of the vine and the branches, right, in John, where, for those of you who aren't familiar with like the Bible talk, right, there's this parable in John where they're comparing Jesus to the vine, like God to the vine, and we're the branches that come from the vine. And then there's this other figure, which is a gardener, and the gardener, I don't do like vineyard shit. I can't even keep succulents growing, but I hear that when you grow plants, right, you trim off the dead branches to create space for new growth, right?
Yes.
And to remove decay and such. But what the pastor from the Presbyterian church was saying was that, like, you're not the gardener, bro. Like, you're not doing the pruning,
Yes.
And so I know that there are pastors speaking out, and part of me just wishes like that those voices were louder. Right? Because we need to be actively hearing these things. So
Yeah, I think I know that not every pastor is going to be like the one who stands up in the middle of the community and speaks. So I am thankful for those voices, and thanks for whoever sent in that I would have loved to have attended that mass.
Right, exactly. You're like, I wish I was there.
Yeah, that's great. So that is part of the pastoral responsibility. And maybe not everybody's called to be part of like, at least the front center. Like, not everybody's a Leo.
Yeah, and dude, that's like super good, because it's a lot. It is a lot.
At the same time, we don't. I think we just need more than the one voice.
Right.
We need a group kind of coming up. Whether or not they're going to be loud, we need to see them.
Yes, and that's the thing, is it's really easy to throw rocks at one person.
It is. Totally.
I'm very aware at the moment of how easy it is to be a sole target, right? But the thing is I know I'm not saying anything different than anybody learned in seminary if they went to a real seminary. I think that it's time to stand up and say something and like present a different pastoral voice, because this is absurd what's happening.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to share with us. I know that you're someone that does the actual work, which is something that I like about you, because I actually don't think privilege is a bad thing. I'm going to go on record and say that. Privilege is innocuous, right? It just kind of exists because of the systems we have, which, for better or for worse, Rage Against the Machine, right? But privilege exists. But the problem with privilege is similar to wealth. The problem is not wealth. The problem is distribution of wealth.
Yeah.
And so we can share privilege, and I view you, and I've come to see you, right, as someone who shares your privilege by standing up for the least of these.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me about what that looks like in this moment. Like, how do we share the privilege we have, whether or not we're pastors?
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like to do the real work of actually loving people
Mm-hmm.
in a moment like this? Because I don't know that we're seeing it a lot.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest things over the last few years that I've realized for myself personally is, I've been somebody who's been an ally, let's say, for LGBTQ folk, but it's not really until the last few years that I've been quite more vocal about it.
Okay.
But for me, I've had to come to this, like, if from what we were talking about earlier, of like, if I'm not standing with folk who are different than me and standing up with them, then I'm not on their side.
Right.
In order for me to be an ally, I need to actually have a relationship. I need to talk. I need to stand with. So part of that is just kind of recognizing what does allyship look like.
Yeah.
When in the I know I'm pointing to LGBTQ, but like we're talking about folks of other faith that have been called out in some of these recent videos, different political parties, whatever. It's a realization that there are people in power who are trying to put down people who don't have that power. As somebody who is a white man, I didn't earn any of the privilege I have. It was just given to me the day that I was born. My job is to be aware that I have it. And then to figure out how to use it in a way that's going to benefit the most people.
Right. Absolutely. Like it's the same concept of there's actually enough food in the world to feed the whole world, but it's not distributed evenly. In case you're wondering, that's real, by the way.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking about that this morning. Even like people who get pissed off about the idea of distributing wealth or giving rights or privileges to other groups. There's this mentality that like there's just not enough, and so like if we give it to these folks, you're taking it away from me. Which I just like to say, like, there's just like this never-ending storehouse. Like it's if we're talking about love, and if we're talking about like creating equity for people, that doesn't run out.
Right.
And just because I want to give it to somebody who doesn't have it right now doesn't mean I have to take from anybody.
Right, yeah, like that's really weird. It's like it's not love and justice are not finite concepts,
No,
right?
they're not.
There's not a limited amount of them that
Not at
exist
all.
in the world. Yeah, they're not like a fossil fuel, a non-renewable resource of love. Like,
Right.
oh God, if we love these people, there's none left for us. Shit. What am I gonna do to my dog? Like, I can't love my dog
I just
if I
gave
love
all my
neighbor.
love to that person on the street. And,
Ugh. It's the worst. I think that this is just such a salient conversation because I think there's a lot of conflation with spirituality and Christendom with this type of toxic theology that we're seeing a lot of. And so simultaneously there's a pushing away of people who might otherwise engage with spirituality.
Yeah.
But there's also a complete silencing of people who have a voice in the conversation. And I think that that's unacceptable at this point in world history,
Totally. Yeah. A church should be. I mean, if you think about where church came from, if we're talking about like 2,000 years ago, a Palestinian Jew doesn't look anything like me.
Palestinian, for the record. Stop sharing Christians for Israel posts. Oh my God.
That's a whole other.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Conversation. Yeah. But yeah, so a church in the church, after the Holy Spirit comes on Acts 2, like there's this whole like it goes out. It's supposed to go from here and spreading out in even wider circles. The church is never supposed to be like this one small tiny group of people.
Correct.
It is meant to be an expansion of God's love to everybody.
You know, it's ironic, is that Christianity often falls into the realm of being anti-Semitic. A lot of modern, especially evangelicalism, right? Because the closer I move to mainline churches, the less anti-Semitism I experience. But
Still exists.
it still exists, but like I'm at least being taught better, right? As I'm actively in school. Once again, just to prove my validity. But Christianity often falls into the realm of anti-Semitism.
It does.
But if you look at Judaism, Judaism was a movement from the margins for the margins. And it was an active movement to bring love and justice to the world. And my study of Judaism and Islam, for the record, in case anyone's watching, but my studies of other Abrahamic faiths, including the other Abrahamic faiths of Judaism and Islam, brings me closer to action than exclusion. And I think that's, for me, the bottom line.
Like, you know, if Jesus is talking about, you know, the two important commandments of love God and love your neighbor as yourself, you know, he's pulling from Jewish scriptures of this idea of like, yes, love God, but, you know, love your neighbor as yourself, but that's also tied into loving people who are not like me.
Exactly.
You know, that's talking about loving the foreigner and the stranger among you.
Absolutely.
Kind of a thing.
That was the whole part. That was the whole thing. That was the whole message. Was literally love, active love, not passive love. Active love.
Yeah, a love that's, you know, when we're talking about loving the stranger or, you know, the foreigner among you, it's not like, I really support.
Right.
I really support, but
Right.
you know, I know this loudmouth president's like shooting off about how, like, you know, you're not bringing your best and you're bringing your shittiest people over here.
Right.
And there's a whole crisis at the border and whatever. And you fled like this war-torn like situation, and you've miles and miles, and you've come here, and I love you, but you shouldn't be here.
Right, exactly. There's no borders in the conversation of who we love and
Love
who
has
we
no
don't.
border.
Love has no border.
No.
For the record, the world doesn't actually have borders. In case we're
True
having
story.
a conversation about that borders aren't a real thing. For the record, borders and binaries, not real. Oh,
Just we made it up.
that should actually be my thesis. The title of my
that.
thesis paper, right there. Okay, get back to me in a few years. But I think that's the point, is that love does not have borders, and if you have borders, you don't have love. I think the converse of that statement is true, and so I think it's frankly time that we hold our leaders to what they're actually saying. I don't know how else to say that. Like, you are offering lip service if you say you love everybody, but then you actively do not stand up for the marginalized.
Right.
I don't know. There's no lightning bolts coming down, so I've not been smoted yet.
Not yet.
But I think
Despite many prayers.
Despite many prayers, right? Man, there was a whole horde of people praying for me to fail at the school board meeting. Weird place to flex, but I'm telling you, man, 3 exorcisms later, and they either failed or they were so good I'm a boy. Jury's still out. We don't know. But no, this is the deeper I move in my religious studies, and the deeper I move in my religious praxis, because you cannot, religion without praxis is just, it's fake. It's not real. You know what I mean? Religion without action is not religion. Love without action is not love.
Yep.
And the more that I study, and the more that I learn, then the more that I move into justice work, the more I see it all come together.
Yeah.
And the more what I was taught actually makes sense. And the more the margins seem to hold in terms of what the world needs.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put that, you know.
No, that was wonderful.
I do what I can. Thank you very much. I'll see you later.
Well, something
Bye, guys. Have a good night. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I really appreciate your presence, because I think that what I appreciate is, this is a weird statement to say, because, like, I'm, just like a little bit younger than you, and whatever.
We don't have to get into
We don't have to get into numbers here, but something that I've, like, that's been cool to see, is I remember you saying to me, like, oh, I think I might, like, maybe be kind of sensing a call to ministry, and now you're like, the word of the Lord is justice. But I've seen, it's cool, because, like, I've seen you grow into this person that like your calling and your spirituality brought you to this place, and simultaneously my spirituality has grown.
Yes.
And weirdly, here we are at this same place,
Yeah.
back in the town where it all started,
Yeah.
doing the work now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate your presence and your voice in this conversation. Is there any? I know you have a special dope treat for us here with some music, but is
I
there
hope
anything
so.
you'd like to say as we like wrap up, and thoughts that you'd like to bring into the conversation? Or?
Well, one thing that I would like to get to is one thing that I turn to a lot, and this speaks to the action.
Mhm.
But there's a prayer that I go to a lot. People attribute it to Saint Francis, although that's never been proven. It's more of like in the school of Saint Francis, but it says, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving we receive, and it's in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it's in dying that we are born to eternal life." And what I like about that, particularly even that first line, "Lord, make me an instrument." Like an instrument, like I have this guitar, its purpose is not to just sit here and look pretty. Its purpose is to make music. Its purpose is action. So saying, praying to God, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace," is a prayer of like, God, like, move my feet.
Yeah, it's an implication of action.
Yes,
Yeah.
and make me an instrument of your peace. And there again, that's not just like, oh, like peace, man, peace and love, like,
Peace, bro.
oh, just kumbaya and everybody get along.
Yeah.
Like an instrument of your peace, like somebody who's out there doing the work, getting involved and producing peace. And all of these statements of like, where there's hatred, let me sow love. Like these are like where there's something going wrong, let me be the one who is working toward the solution.
Yes,
Right?
I mean, sowing is an action, right?
Yeah,
Sowing is a metaphorical action. I am taking this thing and I am placing it in the world so that it can grow.
Exactly.
That is not a passive function.
Yeah, and so that's there's our scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, the Christian scriptures, even what I understand of the Quran and other traditions. Like this is not a passive thing.
No, not at all.
We are called to like literally do something. So
I have a question, and I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but in your understanding, like of we are called to action, and this is the situation we see a hand in only in. Like, what are your tangible action points that you would present to people, like people who want to take action and get involved?
okay, so do we want to talk? Are we talking specifically about like what's at hand right now?
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
that, and then we'll go general.
Okay, one of the things, and I saw a lot of calls for this as it was unfolding early on, was showing up. Whether it was showing up at the Stand-In for Love, whether it was showing up at the school board, not even necessarily having to go in and speak at the school board, but just being there as a presence of support is huge. Having the conversations with not everybody's gonna like stand up at the school board and speak.
Absolutely.
But if you're a letter writer person, send a letter to the school board, to the district superintendent.
Yep.
And if you have concerns about what's going on, make sure that they hear your voice. I wasn't around 3 years ago when things fell down last time.
Yep.
And got swept under the rug. But the reason these things are now even in the conversation is because somebody decided they needed to stand up and talk and say something. And whether that's creating an anonymous Facebook page to make us all aware of it. Thank you, by the way.
Yeah, thank you, Church of Tolerance person who's not me, just in case anyone's wondering, I'll throw it out there again.
But I mean, yeah, these are the things, that's an anonymous action, and not everybody has to do the stand up and I'm going to do this thing, but we can all write letters. We can all and One of the things that I also want to make sure that we talk about too is continuing to be an ally.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in these sorts of situations, and I'm speaking from somebody, let's say, who doesn't have any real life connection with this, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. Um, but these events are triggering, and they stir up a lot of emotion.
Absolutely.
And you know, so being able to be a supportive presence, you know, whether even if it's just like lending your shoulder, lending your ear to listen, that's huge.
Absolutely.
That's like we need people in whatever spaces when people are falling down like that and being crushed by these things.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a very real toll. And as someone who has been like involved in activism for a lot longer than just the past year, I got a lot of comments on my Facebook page like, "Oh, have you ever been to a protest before?" And I was like, "Yeah, like I started going like over a decade ago." Okay, next question. But as someone who has been involved in the work of their own redemption for a long time, solidarity is important, and that's the reason that I choose to show up at Black Lives Matter events.
Yeah.
It's not because it's. I mean, actually, so white supremacy affects us all in different ways.
Yes.
But like there are people who've been doing the work for a long time, and it's just about time that we show up and we just like support them, you know, and just show up. And I think that that's an incredibly tangible and salient way to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about these sorts of things would be like, you know, I'm appreciative of this platform for you and I to have these conversations, but one of the things that I don't do unless I'm explicitly asked is to show up to a space and take on a leadership role per se. I don't mind being behind the scenes, but if like I'm not LGBTQ, I'm not you know, Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. So if I'm going to show up in those spaces, I don't necessarily think that I need to assume like, you know, any other white man, that I automatically have the privilege of leading whatever's happening.
Right.
You know, if somebody wants me to help lead or do something, I'm going to do that. But my hope is to be there as a person who supports in whatever way that's needed. And that looks like a lot of different things, but I would rather have somebody tell me, this is what I need from you, rather than me assuming
Absolutely.
I know what they need.
Absolutely, and I think that there is a benefit too to that collective compounding of energy too. You know what I mean? It's there's a reason that the Bible said where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, so also will I be there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the same when it comes to movements of justice. Is like you don't have to have the answers.
Yep.
You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be the target of the harmful action, right? But just showing up and lending solidarity, I think, is actually of spiritual importance, of energetic importance, right?
Most
I absolutely
certainly.
agree. I agree. I have to thank you for your thoughts, and also I would be remiss to not mention that someone else said they're really glad you're around now too, for the record. Just you know. Great ones. You'll have to check all of our multiple videos thanks to technical difficulties. But no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you know, it's weird. You're doing sort of revolutionary pastoral work by just like actually doing throwback pastoral work. Like before preacher sneakers, before mega churches, before all of these other institutions, like this is just what we were actually supposed to do. And it's a collective communal work, and the work of the pastor is to inspire and love the community, and that bears with it action. So thank you for doing that, even though no one's paying your paycheck for it right now.
Not in this work.
Not in this work, right?
That's okay.
For those of you who are looking for more tangible actions locally, I will drop some comments in here about specific people to email, phone numbers to call, and places and times to show up. There is a board meeting this coming Tuesday at Olean High School, and there will be public comment. If you have not signed up, to comment, you probably cannot, but it's worth an email to the superintendent secretary. But if not, just show up. Just show up. Show up with a sign, show up with a hug, show up with anything, but just show up for love. and be an active participant and actively loving people who need it in this moment. So for those of you who are looking for tangible local actions, this is a thing. For those of you who are looking for more like global actions, please contact refugee resources in your area. Please contact homeless shelters in your area. Contact the Poor People's Campaign.
Yes.
Poor People's Campaign is dope. They've been doing the work for a hot minute, right? Get involved, because even in like I know there's a Poor People's Campaign group that meets in Cuba, New York.
Yeah.
And they've been struggling to gain traction, but there are people doing the work around you.
Yeah.
My advice is honestly probably don't go through your church, but look for people who are actively doing the work, because there are women's rights groups, there are trans rights groups, there are Black Lives Matter groups, there are people who are working for prison abolition, there are people who are working to go and just like befriend and serve and bring love to people who are incarcerated. There is policy work that you can do to politically engage in unjust practices such as mandatory minimums and racist-based policies in the United States of America. There are infinite number of ways to get involved, but look for the people who are already doing the work in your area, because I guarantee you they're there and they're tired and they need you. So if you're looking to act locally, we will have resources here. If you're looking to act in your area, look at those avenues. I don't have like a lot of free time, but if you live in somewhere and you're not sure what's up, let me know and I will Google your town, or you can. But there is work to be done and there's people doing it. And I think some of the benefit of what we can do is show up to the people who've been invested in the work for a long time.
Totally.
Right? So instead of trying to pop off and do our own thing. But I digress. Brian, I know you have a little a musical selection for us. So Brian is actually a musician and he is going to play for us a song. So he's going to get himself set up right here and he's actually going to play us out here. So we'll go ahead and give Brian the screen once he's ready. So Joanna, it would be dope if you would be there in mutual support. If you have any questions about local actions, you can typically ask me. The Olean Regional Justice Coalition also posts a lot, as does Conversations. My project, Conversations, is a podcast and spiritually minded community, but we desire to think globally and act locally, so a lot of times there's local actions posted on there. At the very least, you can look at my personal page, Leo Walters Tahara on Facebook. So thank you guys for joining us, and let's let Brian play us out now.
Awesome. So quick context to this song. This is an original song called The Way. It's based on a story in Luke 10, and so the Cliff Notes version is this expert in the Jewish law comes up to Jesus and says, what are the two most important commandments? And apparently it comes down to love God, love your neighbor. And so this lawyer, this person who's like really steeped in the law says, okay, yeah, but right, who is my neighbor? And Jesus begins to tell this story about the Good Samaritan, which is a phrase that you often hear. And basically what happens is there's a guy beaten half dead on the side of the road, and a religious guy walks by, like a priest of some sort, another religious authority walks by, and they both see and they pass on the other side. And the Samaritan, a type of person who Jews and Samaritans in that time did not get along. And this guy picks him off the side of the road, attends to his wounds, sends him to an inn, pays the bill, and says, like, I'll be back, and whatever else I owe you, I'll pay for this guy. And so Jesus is all like, so who was the neighbor? And the one who attended to him was the neighbor. So I wrote a song kind of based on this back and forth. It doesn't want to stay up.
No, it doesn't want to stay up. I don't know if there's any way I can help you.
That's okay. I'll just look down.
Do you want me to hold it?
Nah. Yeah, see, it would help if I actually memorized lyrics, but
No, that's really hard work.
How do you read it? How do you read me? How does the good book show you the way? will you live knowing what you know? Could it be you already know the way? It all comes down to love. There's no other way. Do this and you'll live. You may ask, who is my neighbor? Who do I love as I walk along the way? Who's worthy of my time and compassion? Must it be anyone come along the way? It all comes down to love. There's do this and you'll live. Give me your strength, give me a new heart. I'll need them both as I walk along the way. I cannot love like you are asking. Unless you're there to meet me on the way. It all comes down to love. There's no other way. Oh, do this and you'll live. It all comes down to love. There's no other way. Do this and you'll live.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, friend. I know that singing in front of an audience is in and of itself an act of vulnerability, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I also appreciate your very tangible take on what it means to like actually act in love.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate that, and I appreciate your presence in silence and in numbers of showing up in Olean, and I'm glad that you're back incredibly. So
I'm glad to be back.
Well, apparently there's work to be done in Olean, and
There is.
we're two of the people here to do it. So
Let's do
thank you so much everyone for watching. I do apologize for the technical difficulties, but I appreciate that you stuck this out. I'm going to drop a stitched together video in YouTube form. If you'd like to share it, I'll have that up tonight. Also, please, if you're interested in acting locally, this coming Tuesday night, there will be a board meeting at Olean High School. I believe that the meeting starts at 6:30, and we will meet at 6 outside to attend. If you are interested, please contact Tim Sherlock for more information. He's organizing a group of concerned citizens to take action on this matter. I do believe I will be there myself as long as I'm not buried under graduate school homework. But if you are interested in showing up locally, that's the place to go. Tuesday night we'll be talking. There's a bunch of concerned citizens presenting at the Olean City School District School Board meeting. If you're interested in being a greater part of Conversations, please check out conversationsofficial.com. You can find all of our socials on there. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. Also, I am live every week, either Sunday night or Monday night, depending on my guest time frame, to have continuing spiritually minded conversations about life, belief, and the intersection of the two. Additionally, I'm going to put this plea out there. Many of you have asked where I go to church, what church I work at, or how you can be a part of what I'm doing. So if you're interested, I am looking to start a local gathering here in Olean and to make conversations more of a formalized group. The only way that I can do that is with your support. If you go to conversationsofficial.com, you can find the Patreon for Conversations Official. Patreon is the place that you can make a monthly donation to help keep the lights on, keep the internet working, and to also make it possible for us to gather in person regularly and intentionally. So please consider supporting the Patreon. I haven't pushed it in the past because I feel weird, but so many people are asking me to start something, and the only way that I can do that is if we all do it together. So conversationsofficial.com if you'd like to find the Patreon information. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will actually see you tomorrow for a special episode with a friend of mine who is anonymous and runs a Instagram page called Decolonizing Christianity, where we're not going to talk about the intersections of white supremacy and American evangelicalism and oppression of Native American peoples, and we're going to talk about how that happened, where we're at now, and how we actively dismantle that system. So join us tomorrow for conversations. Brian, thank you. Is there any place people can follow your work if they're interested to follow what you're doing?
Oh gosh, I don't even know.
Compassion writing?
Compassionwriting.com. I'm attempting to do some freelance writing work, particularly for nonprofit organizations. You can find me on Facebook,
Right.
Brian Lothridge.
All right,
there.
awesome.
Yeah.
We'll put both of your tags in
Yeah.
the
Yes.
comments here, and I'll also make sure to put them in the podcast so that people can find you. So Brian Lothridge on Facebook, compassionwriting.com is his freelance project. He's a great writer. Hire him to say words for you.
Thank you.
Brian. Thank you so much, everybody. I will see you tomorrow, and then we'll see you every week from here on out until the world's a better place. Have a good night, everybody.
This has been the Conversations Podcast. Thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions or comments, or just want to get involved, feel free to join the conversation on social media. You can find us at Conversations Official on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And please don't forget to rate, follow, and share this podcast. We're available on Anchor, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.